Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Well, Niki, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you being on. I was in touch with the FWC, and they reached out to you and said, "Hey, you're probably the best person to talk to," and that's kind of how we got connected. So why don't you start by telling people who you are, what you do, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. My name is Niki Desjardin, and I'm the co-president and co-owner of Ecological Associates. We're a local environmental consulting firm based in Jensen Beach and have been in business there for 30 some odd years, which is exciting. And that has brought me in front of lots of different cool topics and species, most of which in the beginning was sea turtles. That's how I got my start with the company. But now more and more through my work, I'm doing more with shorebirds and also through some volunteer efforts with the Florida Shorebird Alliance, which is a program managed by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and then also with Audubon of Martin County, where I'm recently a co-president there as well. So lots of cool stuff going on in the Treasure Coast.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've got a lot of stuff going on, but those are all really cool endeavors. You mentioned shorebirds. That's kind of how we had gotten connected. Is I don't remember if I came across the Florida Shorebird Association or if it was like the Treasure Coast chapter, but it was something that really interested me. If we could, I think it might be interesting to touch on that for a minute. You know, maybe to let people know why shorebirds are important. Maybe what species they might see. I think sometimes maybe you go to the beach or you go to, you kind of just assume a bird's a bird. And I think it'd be something that would be interesting to educate people on.
Yeah, I agree. I think shorebirds don't get their fair share of the limelight, especially on the beach with sea turtle nesting. They're highly
Right.
charismatic species that seem to get all the press. But shorebirds in Florida are really important. Florida does serve as a migratory stopover for a lot of important species, some of them being endangered or threatened. And we also have a ton of birds that are resident here year round. So the ones that people would commonly see are the sanderlings and ruddy turnstones that scurry along the shoreline. There's black-bellied plovers and willets, some of the more common birds. But we'll also see gulls and terns, very commonly laughing gulls and ring-billed herring gulls, pelicans, and some of the other seabirds. We kind of refer to seabirds and shorebirds together as shorebirds, but they do technically have some differences.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you had mentioned turtles and turtle nesting. Is there a time for generalized bird nesting season or shorebird nesting season, or does that also kind of vary among the species or if they're migrating?
Yeah, the breeding season for shorebirds on the Treasure Coast is about April through August. So overlaps with the turtle breeding season. But mainly the beginning of the season is the birds arriving. Some birds like the least terns will only nest here. They don't reside here year round. So they'll come in, look for appropriate breeding sites. They'll engage in some courtship and mating behavior. And then if they find a suitable site on the beach, they'll set up shop there, create their nests, go through the incubation process and hatching and rear their chicks. And then at the end of the season, typically by late July, August, they're wrapping things up and moving along.
That's awesome. So, is that a species of bird that does nest directly on the beach? Because I know we talked about that before, and I know that maybe there was less than at least I might have expected. Is that a species that nests on the beach, or would they be up in trees, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back to the Florida Shorebird Alliance, that is a group of volunteers that assist the FWC in monitoring the breeding sites in the county. So I coordinate the group, and we're always happy to have more volunteers. So if you're interested, people can reach out. But we're looking at beach locations and rooftop locations. So aside from nesting on the beach, which is their natural place to nest, shorebirds, because of coastal development and other shoreline disturbance, mainly from humans, have moved to other sites, which include rooftops, because some of the old roof coverings were actually tar and gravel, which appeared to be like a beach. So shorebirds have taken that opportunity to adapt to a different type of
Hmm.
habitat, which works pretty well, with the complication that it's elevated. And so, if there's not
Right.
an appropriate barrier around the rooftop, the chicks might fall off. So, this is something that unfortunately is a struggle for the shorebirds that are nesting on the rooftops. We have chicks washing down the gutters when it rains, as it does every afternoon. And so the rooftops are a pretty good substitute, but not perfect.
Wow, I didn't realize that that was directly rooftops. When you had said that previously, I thought that was like cool lingo for like canopy or something higher up. So that's kind of interesting, and I think maybe tagging on to the point you had made, I imagine that beach nesting it makes them a little bit more vulnerable now. I mean, you always know where a turtle nest is, at least if somebody has marked it, and you kind of know where to stay away. You maybe don't always have that with shorebirds. Um, is there a way that maybe families or people that are going to the beach could keep in mind the shorebirds to say, hey, look, let's make sure that they're having a suitable habitat here and we're not making it more difficult than it already is for them?
Yeah, the shorebird nests are really camouflaged, and that is, of course, to protect them from predators and things like that. But the eggs themselves are speckled brown and white and black, and they blend in almost completely with the sand. And not to mention, they are nesting directly on the sand. They create what's called a scrape, which is just a little depression in the sand that they lay their eggs right into, and the parents will incubate the eggs right there on the surface of the sand. But yeah, it makes them very vulnerable to disturbance. And because they're so hard to see, if you're just walking through the upper beach area, which is where they would commonly nest, you might accidentally step on a nest and not even know it. Or if you're in a place that allows driving on the beach, then you could potentially drive right over a shorebird nest and not see it. The colonial birds will be a little bit more noisy and would tell you that they're nesting there, but the solitary nesting shorebirds would just be an individual pair by themselves. And so they would typically give you a diversion, and they would try to draw you away from the nest, but probably by then the damage is already done. So we always ask people just to stay away from walking near the dune or the upper beach, particularly if you're seeing birds congregating in an area, and try to avoid flushing them or causing them to fly off, because it might seem harmless, but those birds really depend on the fat reserves that they're gaining by eating while they're here. And repeatedly flushing can cause them to not only be stressed out, but to use up those valuable nutrients and resources that they need for breeding or ultimately for migration after the breeding season. But that includes keeping your pets on a leash. We always like to have our dogs out there running freely, but particularly in areas that are not designated dog beaches, that's where the birds might actually be nesting, and unleashed animals could be quite a problem.
That's all super interesting, and it's funny because for I remember as a kid, everybody used to just always say, don't go on the dunes. You should never like go on the dunes, and you would almost say that to like your kids. And I don't really ever remember being told exactly why. You always assumed it was like an ecological thing, but I imagine that's one of many reasons to not upset that ecosystem. um, and it's interesting too the way you would put it as far as the migrating birds. I'm sure, yeah, they're coming here almost as like a hibernation period, trying to get ready. The last thing they need is us coming in, making sure making it 10 times harder on them. my
Yeah.
my other question for this was, and maybe you've already answered it, is what the biggest threats are facing shorebirds. I imagine it has something to do with us and development, but I'll let you kind of go into what you think are the biggest challenges and threats.
Yeah, I wish I had some better answers than just human disturbance and coastal development, but here in South Florida, that really is the biggest pressure. I mean, nobody wants coastal property more than here where we live, and it's understandable. It's a beautiful place to be, but unfortunately, it's a conflict there because that coastal strip is so necessary for so many species, and their life cycles of breeding and resting and just existing. So while humans and nature have to try to coexist there, that's where that boundary can be so difficult. So I would certainly say the development is the biggest threat of climate change and sea level rise and warming oceans can also be a challenge for birds too, because it's going to change where their food is, and maybe they have to fly farther or more distant to get the food they need. So there's certainly some challenges associated with that as well.
Do hurricanes, I mean, I guess this would have to do with different weather patterns and things like that, but do hurricanes have much of a sway in how the shorebirds are affected? I imagine maybe it's more temporary than obviously if we're developing an entire coastline or something. But how do storms affect them, if at all?
Yeah, it's temporary. It would just be the duration of the storm itself. But there are weather patterns that can sweep shorebirds off course. And that happened, I think it was last year or the year before in the Gulf, when some hurricanes took some flamingos from Mexico and brought them
Yeah.
over to Florida. It was exciting for the birders because we don't normally see flamingos here, but it was not intentional. The birds kind of ended up here as a result of the storms.
Right. Yeah, they're probably just as confused as the birders were.
Yeah.
What what do you think, before we move on to other things, um if someone was to see like an injured shorebird, what should they do? Call FWC? Are there other local organizations they should get in touch with?
Yeah, we typically have success by calling the local animal services. Martin County has an animal service program. St. Lucie County does as well. They will respond and help out in certain situations, but they normally would require that you're there when they respond. So you can't just call them up and say, hey, there's an injured bird here, and then go home. They really want you to be there when they arrive. So they'll help. If you have the ability to transport the animal yourself, you can always take it to Bush Wildlife down in Jupiter or the Treasure Coast Wildlife Center here in Martin County. Those are two great places. And if all that fails, you can always call the FWC Wildlife Alert Hotline, which is 888-404-3922.
Nice. So there's quite a bit at people's disposal. What are some other important issues that you feel are going on at the moment? I mean, maybe it would help to talk a little bit about your company, about EAI as well, um, and that might set the tone a little bit for what you feel are important issues now between EAI and the Audubon, which you said you're now co-president of. Maybe you've got more of a grasp on things that are closely affecting the community here.
Yeah, and there's a long list of things that we should be concerned about with the
Yeah.
environment, especially here locally. We have our beautiful Indian River Lagoon, and north of that, we've got the Mosquito Lagoon and Banana River systems in Brevard County. I think everyone's aware of water quality being an issue, and that certainly remains a big issue for all of us to be tuned into. We're doing a lot of water quality sampling work with the different coastal counties. Just keeping an eye on that, looking at seagrass plantings, mangrove habitat. Those are some important things that the counties are looking at. Aside from that, it's with Audubon, we're just mainly trying to educate. It's getting the word out about habitats, not just birds. Audubon is all about birds, but really the habitats they depend on too. So our advocacy and conservation efforts really expand to the whole ecosystem, not just shorebirds. So we do bird outings. We'll take people out to some of the STAs managed by the Water Management District and do some great birding tours with some really expert birders there. So that's always fun and a good way to improve your bird ID skills. And on top of that, it's a lot of public outreach. We attend a lot of events and provide educational experiences for kids and have programs that we run out of our Possum Long Nature Center in Martin County as well for both youth and adults.
Yeah, and maybe when we publish this, I can share some of the Audubon materials. I know there's a website where you've got some of the events, and the center there is really like it's such a beautiful, serene place, it would be. Are there guides? Is it there at the Audubon that they handle some of these tours? Because I know sometimes people just kind of walk around that area.
Yeah. Um,
Cool.
some of the planned tours are usually at a distant location, but they have docents there during the week. And if anyone walks in and says, I'd like to have a little birding tour, they can even take you, or we could set something up for local people that want to just pop in and walk around Possum Long. I don't think that we have regular tours set up there. We do have scrub jay tours that we help lead at Jonathan
Right.
Dickinson State Park. So that's part of our regular calendar.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's very cool. What are you when it comes to EAI? It is that will people bring you in basically to say, hey, look, how is this affecting? And I don't want to mean to kind of bring it back, but I was thinking about it. Um, is somebody calling EAI because they say, hey, look, this is what we're thinking of doing, and we want to know, hey, what impact could it have on this or this or this? And then they bring you all in as kind of that consultant.
So the work that we do is for both government clients and private clients, but a lot of the local governments are looking at their coastal habitats, their shorelines. Sometimes they're looking to put in a living shoreline. So they'll work with an engineering firm, and sometimes we'll come in to do some environmental components of that, whether it's seagrass or benthic monitoring, or gopher tortoise monitoring. We just did a big project with Martin County at Twin Rivers Park in Rocky Point. Fun fact, there's probably more gopher tortoises there than you'll ever find anywhere else.
Yeah, they're all over the place there.
Yeah, tons. But we do lots of cool stuff for our clients. It's really an amazing job. Lots of diversity. We do a lot of work for a local utility, making sure that all of their transmission and distribution lines are distributed without impact to the environment and supporting environmental permitting. We're doing a lot of work at the power plants as well, looking at the seawater that's drawn in from the power plants. We look at impacts to fish populations and plankton, and are looking at how the species that are drawn into the power plants are surviving, and looking at the assemblages of species, what kinds of animals they are, if they're commercially important. And we have taxonomists working on some of the plankton. And then we've got the sea turtle and shorebird monitoring that we do all over the state of Florida. And now we're working in North Carolina and Mississippi as well on some additional nourishment projects there, where we're looking at impacts to sea turtles and shorebirds.
That's really cool, and I can see how you would find that fulfilling. How did you get into? Uh, you said you're the co-founder of EAI, or how did you get involved in this from the start?
Well, it's no, I'm not the founder. Our founders are still around though, and they're interacting with us all the time. They're good friends. Bob and Eric started the company in 1994. They retired and sold the company to a gentleman named Stan DeForest in 2015. And then my business partner, Jimmy Sellers, and I were able to purchase the company upon Stan's death. He passed away unexpectedly in 2021. So Jimmy and I took up the reins and are now leading the company, and feel so fortunate to be doing that.
Yeah, that's I can see how there's a lot of benefits to doing something like that. What are some success stories that you've seen? Maybe whether it's local conservation efforts or um, interesting benefits that you've seen. It could be here, or it could be maybe outside of the area, because I know that you're obviously working even in other states at this point. But I'm interested to hear from your perspective what good stories you've got.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a sea turtle slanted answer, of course, but I did get into the consulting business after grad school just sort of by accident. No one really thinks, or I didn't at least, that I want to grow up and be a consultant. Like, no one really thinks about that. So
Right.
um, the cool part about this job is that it's constantly changing, and there's so many different things that I get the chance to be involved with. And one was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And the company that we are, we're nimble, flexible, and quick to be able to respond in the case of an emergency. So we were able to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and FWC, and went up to the Panhandle, we had a team of folks that went up there. We brought all of our equipment, and we worked closely with the conservation agencies and the work that was being done to protect sea turtle nests throughout Alabama and Florida. And that was a huge success story because we were able to ensure the protection of the turtle nests, and we participated in the translocation of the eggs from the Panhandle to the east coast of Florida. If you're familiar with what happened back then, it was a huge effort, pretty much unprecedented.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that, and that's really interesting. It's always a good story when there are different organizations from different places, from different states, or their government, they're private, and they come together to do something good. Sometimes you hear stories about a lot of organizations like that come to one point and it turns into like a disaster. So that's really cool that you all, from the conservation standpoint, could get it done.
Yeah, it was awesome. A lot of good people working together and drawing on connections from the past, people that I'd worked with in the past and new friends that I know now. That's kind of led us to some other work in different places as well. Like North Carolina, for example, are some folks that I knew through sea turtle work, going to different international meetings. We're recognized as an expert in the field, so we're often invited to come join projects in different places because of that.
Are there any issues that are really near and dear to you at this point? I mean, I don't want to like keep trying to lead you into saying something about sea turtles. So tell me if I'm just like being redundant. But is there anything that's really important to you now that you're going, you've been to the Gulf, you're doing stuff here, obviously along the Treasure Coast and East Coast, you're up in the maybe North Carolina Outer Banks area. You said you're in Mississippi. Is there any efforts that you see as really near and dear to you, and maybe even something that's newer than what you might have been interested in 5 years ago?
That's such a hard question to answer. And I feel challenged by just the general public's perception of nature and that it doesn't necessarily hold a place of importance. I think that needs to change because we have such a huge impact, as we were talking about, and it's vital for us to make concessions or find compromises with what we want to do while still being able to preserve nature. There's a lot of things changing, and whatever you think is the cause, it is changing. And I think that it's our duty to respond in a responsible and respectful way.
Well, Nikki, that's probably a good place to end it. I think that was a really good. That's great to hear. I agree. The more we can do to protect this area, the more we'll kind of be able to. Hopefully, my kids and their kids and their kids will be able to look at an interview like this and say, okay, well, hey, maybe they did the right thing to protect what they loved, and not, oh, dang, what could have been if only we could have maybe seen those turtles that we always watch the documentaries on, type of conversation. But is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up?
There's one thing that I had in mind that you could edit out if you think it's too political, but the conversation about the property tax vote.
I'm interested to hear what you think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to become more educated about it, and I was just listening to a podcast about it. And what I'm hearing from my clients is that if that happens, it's going to draw funding away from what local governments might put towards conservation efforts in favor of covering the budget that was covered by property tax income. So I am concerned about that. I need to do more research, but I would encourage your viewers to also educate themselves before that vote.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's going to be a hot topic for the next month or two. And it is important for people to do some research. I mean, myself included, a lot of times, you hear things and you hear the name of a bill or you hear this or that, and sometimes the surface level is not always what it seems. So I appreciate you giving your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the questions and your interest too. It's really cool to see what you're doing, and I checked out some of your other videos and stuff. It's really interesting.
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate it, Nikki. Well, I'm feel very grateful. I mean, all I do is sit here and, run articles and Facebook groups and stuff. Mostly you're the one out there doing important work. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to be on here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time,